Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this event organized by Studium Generale. The title of this event is Protest, Slogans and Free Speech on Campus, and obviously with a specific focus on the Gaza situation and the Israel-Palestine situation. My name is Filippo Santoni. I am an associate professor in ethics and philosophy of technology at this university. I've been working at the faculty TBM for more than 12 years now, and I will be the moderator of this event. The speaker of this event is David Wertheim, who is a cultural historian and the director of the Menasseh Ben Israel Institute for Jewish Studies in Amsterdam. In 2022, he has published the book Waar gaat, alles over Joden, gaat. Sorry for my terrible Dutch. The translation of which is, what are people talking about when they talk about Jews? And he will give a presentation in a moment, and then we will have ample time to engage in a conversation with him. As you know, this is a very hot, sensitive, and topic for everybody here. So I will make the usual disclaimer that we always make at the beginning of these meetings. I am a big supporter of freedom of speech. I do believe not only that we have the freedom, but we have the duty and the obligation to talk about these things in a university like this. And in the past months, there has been a movement of students who have advanced strong requests to the CVB, the management board of the university. So just to give you a bit of the context where we are having this meeting, and it's not, and I have accompanying the students in and helping them bring in their requests to the management board of university. The main request of the students have been to have a full transparency about the university connections and ties to companies and institutions and universities that are somehow connected to the defense government, the Israeli defense, the Israeli government and the defense operations, the military operations that are underway in Gaza in these months after the attacks of the 7th October, to freeze the ties with the institutions that have these connections and to express support to the Palestinian community everywhere, but also in this university by allowing them to express their discomfort and to bring out their protest. So this is the situation so far. There have been some meetings with the CVB, and the protests are ongoing, as the CVB hasn't taken a strong position on this yet, and so the students are keeping their protests going. But back to the topic of today, without further ado, before giving the words to David Wertheim, whom we already thanked for his participation, I will restate, as I was saying, the importance of having a respectful dialogue here. Every question can be posed, but no violent, discriminatory, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, or otherwise offensive language will be accepted. And I will ensure that the conversation will proceed along the lines of a respectful conversation. David, the floor is yours. I think you will go about 20 minutes in your presentation.
Yeah, something like that.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Hello, can everybody hear me well? Thank you for this invitation and for this introduction. As you said, 1.5 years ago, I wrote a book on the question. The question was actually of the book, why so many topics concerning Jews in the Netherlands are so central to the feelings of so many non-Jewish people in the Netherlands. It came out about a year before October 7th, so it was not written in response to the events of that day and the war that ensued after it. Nevertheless, I think the questions that I asked myself then are more topical than ever at the moment. Ever since October 7th, the conflict between Israel and Hamas has been on the front pages. The war, it was said, was the best gift Putin could get. And indeed, the war in Ukraine has taken a back seat in the public eye. Everywhere we see flags, graffiti, posters of hostages also. There are constantly demonstrations. There's a lot of public debate on the issue. And of course, in the university, a very big protest movement has arisen, one on a scale that the university has not seen in years. Obviously, Jews and Palestinians are involved in these debates, but they constitute just a small part of those that are engaged. Let me give 2 examples. Now let's see if this works. So this example is in Dutch, but it's a tweet from the SGP, an ultra-Orthodox Christian political party in the Netherlands. And they call for a demonstration on Dam Square in Amsterdam in solidarity with the Jews. And they write that during this demonstration, they will sing the Israeli national anthem, the Hatikva, they will sing Jewish songs, and they will sing psalms. So here you see a very Christian engagement with this. Now let me give another example. This is a demonstration in Venlo, in the south of Holland, this October. As you can see, a number of protesters have wrapped themselves in Turkish flags. So as Turks, they feel solidarity with Palestinians. And these are just 2 groups that identify with the conflict in Gaza from a non-Jewish and non-Palestinian perspective. There are many more, as we will see. I'm not planning to give here a talk about who is right or who is wrong in this conflict, or the debate on the conflict here. I have my opinions on it, but there are more than enough opinions, and I'm sure you've heard more than enough opinions on this topic. Therefore, I want to ask a different question, and that's the one that's very closely connected to what I post in my book, which is, why does this conflict cause such passionate feelings among people who are not directly involved in it? And I believe there are 2 obvious answers that usually are given to this question. The first answer is genocide. Those protesting believe a genocide is going on, and it's the seriousness of that crime and the complicity of the Dutch government in it which makes it impossible to be silent. People have to protest because of the seriousness of the crimes committed. But there's also a very different explanation that's been given for the enthusiasm of these protests, and that is anti-Semitism. For other people, the one-sidedness of the protest and the hypocrisy in this one-sidedness reveals the true reason for the passionate feelings of the protesters. That is, they are fed by anti-Semitic prejudices. The protest movement against Israel is seen as just a new form of old conspiracy theories against the Jews, and the word Zionist has become just a code word for the term Jew. And I give here a quote from Eva Illouz, who wrote in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz this theory. Israelis are held to a different standard because it's almost impossible to separate them from the old category of Jews as criminally threatening world order. I think there is some truth to both visions, but also that they are both flawed. It cannot be denied that the attention for Gaza in comparison to other humanitarian catastrophes is overwhelming. There was never such a protest movement when the World Cup was in Qatar during the Syrian civil war, not to stop the genocide in Myanmar, and there's hardly any protest against academic collaboration with, for example, Turkey or China, countries which have a very bad record on human rights as well. However, on the other hand, that does not mean that this bias can only be explained by anti-Semitism. I don't want to deny that maybe sometimes this can play a role, but I'm convinced that most people take to the streets because of a deep concern about what's happening in Gaza. And apart from that, if you disagree with somebody, even if you're right, it does not mean that the other side's mistake can only be explained by anti-Semitism. But that leaves us with the question I started with. Why does this conflict cause such strong emotions among people who are not directly involved? And the answer to that question, I think, should be found in the symbolic meaning of this conflict here, and the fact that it has a symbolic significance that goes well beyond the war between Israel and Hamas itself. A significance that often has to do much more with the situation here than with the situation there. And the rest of this talk, I want to elaborate on this symbolism. First, I will look at the symbolism around the Jews, and then I will look at the symbolism around the Palestinians. So, I will start with the Jews, and I will give 3 examples of this symbolism, and the first example is also divided into 3 examples, and that is the Christian symbolism. Oh. This is a picture of Nes Amim. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but Nes Amim is a kibbutz in the north of Israel, and it is a Christian kibbutz. It's founded by Dutch and Swiss Christians in Israel, and its goal was to repair, after the Holocaust, the relationship of Christians and the Jewish people. The basis for that was that the roots of Christianity are to be found in Judaism. This is the good example of the first kind of Christian symbolism. Jews were needed to rehabilitate Christianity after the Holocaust because of the tradition of Christian anti-Semitism, which was believed to took part in the reason that the Holocaust came about. Christians wrestled with this, and they wanted after the war to rehabilitate Christianity from that, and for this they decided there needs to be a Christian-Jewish dialogue. And that dialogue resulted in a very profound Christian interest in Judaism, and even an identification and feelings of solidarity with the Jews. And the Nes Amim kibbutz is an expression of that. Another example is this. This is, it says, Israel is God's wonder. This is a demonstration from the organization Christenen voor Israel, Christians for Israel. And the sign reads, Israel is God's miracle. And they really believe that. For these Christians, and there are many kinds of Christians, so, you know, I'm talking about different groups of Christians. The fact that Jews survived the Holocaust and that they managed to found their own independent state in the land of the Bible, in the promised land, is a miracle. And because it's a miracle, you see the hand of God working in our time. So for them, Israel is nothing less than a proof for the existence of God. And because of that, Israel is really fundamental to their Christian faith. And because of that, they become very enthusiastic for Israel. And then there's a third example, and this is, more from American evangelicals, and that's the idea that the theological idea that if all the Jews return to Israel, that will bring about the second coming of Christ. I've here a quote from a reverend who says as much. A fourth sign is that it is important. That is important to me is the establishment of the state of Israel, from 135 after Christ, the Jews were driven out of Israel. Israel had ceased to exist. There are many texts in the Bible that predict that God will re-establish the state of Israel and that he will bring back the Israelites from all the countries to the promised land. This return is a strong harbinger of the second coming of Jesus. So these are three reasons that for many Christians Israel is really important. Now let me go to another reason. This is, as you can all see, Biden, and he is speaking on commemorating something that will be commemorated tomorrow in a big way, D-Day. Tomorrow is 80 years after D-Day. And this is Biden giving a speech about D-Day, and he writes that D-Day marks the beginning of the liberation of Europe and the defeat of Nazism. And the defeat of Nazism was, of course, also the liberation of the Jews in Europe. It was the liberation of the Jews in Europe and the victory of Western values of democracy, tolerance, and equality. And that has connected the Jews to these values. The protection of the Jews symbolizes these values of democracy, tolerance, equality. A good case in point is the meaning that's attributed to Anne Frank, who, of course, is the most famous Jewish victim of the Holocaust. In 1957, the Anne Frank Foundation was founded, and its mission statement says, "It brings the life story and the work of Anne Frank to the attention of as many people as possible worldwide, partly with the aim of raising awareness of the dangers of anti-Semitism, racism and discrimination, and the importance of freedom, equal rights and democracy." So that also ties Jews to these values symbolically. And then there is a final way Jews are used symbolically, and that is in the fight against Islam. For some, the Jews represent, and especially Israel represents, a fight that needs to be fought against Islam. And here we see a picture of Geert Wilders, who I'm sure you all know, who makes it always very clear that he is a very, very strong supporter of Israel. Another example is the Speaker of the House of the Dutch Parliament, Martin Bosma, who once wrote, when the armies of Hamas and Hezbollah march through the streets of Tel Aviv, then Amsterdam and Paris are helplessly lost. In other words, we have to support Israel because the fight we are waging against Islam within the Netherlands and within Europe. Okay, so here you've seen a number of examples of how the Jews have all these symbolism around them. Now let's go on to the Palestinians. Let's start with this picture. Decolonize Palestine, decolonize yourself. Decolonize is a battle cry that became big during the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. It calls for an adjustment of our entire culture because it says that our culture is in the end completely penetrated by our colonial pasts and by remains of our colonial pasts. And because of that, all kinds of institutions have to be decolonized. Museums, the university, the police, Hollywood, name it, it has to be decolonized. And making an end to the Dutch attachment to Israel, which I just talked about, is seen as part of this broader movement of decolonization. Because Israel is seen as a colonial state, support for Israel is also seen as a colonial endeavor. But I would like to go even a step further. I think Israel is not only seen by many as an example of this colonialism, but as the most important symbol of it. The centrality of Israel in Western culture, the support it received from the West, is seen as the example of its continuous colonization. The blindness to the plight of the Palestinians is seen as symbolizing the blindness to the colonialism which is still present everywhere. But there is more. Many see a discrepancy between the political attention that exists for example, anti-Semitism or the commemoration of the Holocaust or the Hamas attack on Israel on October 7th on one side, and on the other side, the suffering for the Palestinians. And a good example of this is the debate that ensued right after October 7th about the Israeli flag that was decided should be raised near the Dutch parliament. For many Muslims, they felt this as something extremely painful because they remembered, like many instances in which Palestinians were bombed, their rights violated for many years, but never a Palestinian flag was raised near the Dutch parliament. And in that, they recognized a blindness in Dutch society to how they themselves were discriminated. They identify with the Palestinians because they recognize in the lack of attention of the suffering of the Palestinians the same motives that cause the discrimination they have to endure every day. And then here is the third symbolic meaning that's attributed to the war. This is a sign that connects the Palestinians to the fight against climate change. During a big rally for climate change, against climate change, that was held before the elections on the 22nd of November in the Netherlands, suddenly there were everywhere Palestinian flags, and Greta Thunberg was there. She said some slogans in favor of the Palestinians. And last week there was another demonstration because we have elections also tomorrow coming up. And there was another climate demonstration. There was even decided there would be a special section for Palestinian demonstrations to be included in this. A similar example is the way the Palestinian issue is connected to queer rights. So, in other words, here you see that the Palestinian cause is connected and used as a symbol for progressive ideas, progressive values. So here, as a summary, the symbolism that we see around the Palestinians, the symbol of the fight for decolonization, the discrimination of minorities, and progressive values. So I think the reason that there's so much interest, so many emotions in the Netherlands about a war that's going on somewhere else has a lot to do with the symbolism around this conflict. And let me conclude by asking another question. Is this a problem? Is it problematic that this war is attributed symbolic meaning in so many different ways? And I think it is, for a number of reasons, but let me single out just one. Me, personally, I'm convinced that this war is a war of evil against evil. I think Hamas is evil. I think the Netanyahu government is evil. The problem of this symbolism is that it always makes the war in a war of good against evil. And then there's also an absolute necessity that the good side wins. And that will drive the sides only apart and will be an obstacle to any resolution. That does not mean that I do not see the Palestinians and Israelis are pitted against each other in a terrible spiral of violence. That there's a conflict over land, over safety, over rights. I also do not want to deny that people have legitimate opinions about these issues, sometimes very informed. What I want to argue for is that the debate should be less symbolic. I'm sure it will profit from that and even may bring the parties together, at least here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David, floor is open for questions. We have quite some time. Please try and keep the questions as concise as possible so as to be able to collect as many questions as possible. I will keep the mic myself, and I'll start from the gentleman here.
Yes, thank you for your very interesting presentation and explanation. For some of the visions, it's quite clear what they strive for, but for some of them, maybe you can elaborate a little bit on. Imagine that the people who fight for the decolonization, what would be their ultimate vision, their ultimate solution, what they strive for, and for example, also the queer rights. How do they connect Palestine with the queer rights? Can you elaborate a little bit on that, and what would be their ideal vision of how things will turn right in from their perspective?
Well, what I want to argue is that they're basically fighting a fight here in Netherlands, and that they're using the Palestinian case for that. So or a global struggle. So they believe in the case of decolonization, and there are good reasons for that, that we are blind to the remains of the colonial heritage, for example, in institutional racism that exists in the Netherlands and other countries. Palestine is the symbol for that problem. At the same time, there is a whole debate on Palestine as or Israel is seen as a colonial state. That's not what I'm there. You can talk about that also for a long time. But what I want to focus on is that that part of the emotion and the resolve of these protesters, maybe not all, is because of the fight they're fighting here. Yeah.
Okay. There's a question here, then there.
And I think in the queer rights it's even more obvious, because there's always this problem with that Hamas is not really an advocate for queer rights, to say it very. So that's even a bit stranger.
Okay. There's another question here.
Yeah, I also want to address something that drives me for the Palestinian cause, is like this lesson from the Holocaust that you see, like Mark Rutte or Caroline van der Plas or a lot of politicians make, is the lesson from the Holocaust is only never again anti-Semitism, which is a valuable lesson, but it's also more about that the Holocaust has also to be seen in the context of 400 years of genocide upon colonized countries. So where I want the lesson from the Holocaust to be never again for everyone, which also, I'm not sure if this is a question, but...
No, this is actually more a confirmation of what I'm trying to explain, that there are broader issues going on within this conflict. And I said I don't think it's... The debate about the conflict should not be about these broader issues. That doesn't mean that I don't think there should be a debate about these issues apart from the conflict.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. I wanted to ask if I think there's a second layer which complicates everything, and that is, I think either side believes that the other side is not genuine in what they claim, and that there's always a hidden message which is transmitted in these claims. So when it's said, for example, that Israel is a representative of democracy in the Middle East, then often it can be understood as anti-Muslim racism, which is coded in there. On the other hand, you have shown symbols like, I don't know, the reference to, it was in the demonstration and the placards on the reference to the killing of children, which could be a reference of anti-Semitic tropes, or the reference to water, which could also be understood as a reference to old anti-Semitic tropes. So I have the feeling like the problem is not what people are claiming, but that the other side constantly thinks it's not true. It is just like pretend. And how do you get across this problem that there seems to be no proper discussion about this?
Yes, that's an important and difficult question to answer. In the end, I personally, I even wrote an essay about it, that the problem is that people don't want to believe in the sincerity of the other. And of course, sometimes maybe the other isn't sincere, but I think many times they are. And people cannot believe that the person they don't agree with is not sincere. So I think people have to learn that other people can have different opinions without there being some kind of secret motivation to them. And basically that's a plea for tolerance, for the toleration of ideas you don't agree with. I think if you make an attempt to do that, that will help you further.
Right, there's a lot of questions. So on my list, I have the gentleman here, gentleman in the back, and then I'll take another round. So keep your... Cannot keep track of everything.
Yeah. So about the topic on slogans, right? Do you know if you could sort of inform us on this slogan that you see a lot, at least especially here on our campus, but like in general, about from the river to the sea? Is this slogan only anti-Semitic? Is this slogan only for the
It's
fight
funny.
against
Also on
decolonization?
this, I wrote an article in the Volkskrant 2 weeks ago. Well, I have a very specific opinion on that slogan. I think slogans have sometimes a value because they are ambivalent. So everyone can project in them what they want. So people can say them and attribute different meanings to them, and that makes them a success. So this slogan obviously can be explained in a very anti-Semitic way, or a way that it's like from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So what does free Palestine will be free mean? Free of Jews, or free that it's a liberal democratic state? There's a whole debate whether the solution that should be in Palestine and Israel should be a one-state or two-state solution. So this slogan could also be undertaken, and I think many people mean it in that way, especially in the beginning. Maybe now it's a bit different. Now you also hear from the river to the sea, Palestine should be Arabic, then it gets already different. But many see it as a call for a one-state solution. So liberal democracy that's not Jewish, and in that sense it's means an end to Zionism, but a liberal democracy for all the people living from the river to the sea. I don't think that is a slogan that should be forbidden in that meaning. I think when politicians said it in the Dutch parliament, and the parliament decided that it was not allowed to say that slogan there, he added to that even this meaning that it should be a liberal democratic state. But I don't like the slogan, and the problem I have with it is that this is not, the slogan means that you are against a two-state solution. that's basically what you're calling for. You're not calling for an end to the war. You're not going for whatever you're calling for an end to a two-state solution. And the two-state solution is one of the possibilities that's still out there to get something, to make some progress for peace. It's a solution where some tiny steps have been taken to achieve. And in this moment, when there's such a terrible war going on, taking to the street and say that you're against a two-state solution is very problematic, in my opinion.
All right, so I'm looking at Marike to know how long do we have? Or two, and is it okay because I see a lot of questions and I want to give everybody the possibility to speak. Okay, so I have Jose in the back first, and then how do I take all of this question? This is too much. Yeah, no, I'm looking at that. I mean, I'm not forgetting you. All right, I'll think while Jose speaks.
Thank you very much for your interesting perspective. Before I ask my question, I would like to comment that you claim that the discussion is based on symbolism. My experience that is based on facts, so I know a lot of people that are coming from the factual perspective as you are suggesting to come to the topic, right? My question, which is relating factual history with symbolisms as you have discussed, is how is the behavior of Israel today different from previous colonial projects that use religion or ideology, in this case Judaism or even democracy, as a cornerstone of their discourse to justify the dispossession and murdering of indigenous people? For example, in the Americas, where also people that live in the Americas resisted. What is your view on that?
Also, that's a that's a very big question. First of all, I'm not such a fan of judging events or countries on a bigger theoretical framework. So I'm not sure if it's so helpful to see Israel as another example of colonialism. I'd rather see that you just accuse Israel of violating human rights, of whatever you want it to accuse of. On the whole debate on colonialism, I think, well, that's a very long topic, but I think Zionism and Israel, which is the product of Zionism, can be seen both as a product of it and as a response to it. Yeah, I think... you know, let me just give one example of how it's problematic to say that Israel is a colonial state. A lot of people came to Israel after the war, before the war, during the Second World War, because they would be murdered otherwise. That's the reason why they were there. And after when Israel was established, right after the Holocaust, it was very difficult to deny that, because that was the case. I didn't say that it was a colonial state, though, in my question. No, you said, but you said it was...
I said indeed that how is the behavior of violating human rights different from the same behaviors that we now call colonialism today? That was my question.
Yeah, I think there are similarities and there are differences. But I think an important difference is that Israel was established, that a certain strand of Zionism, because there are many kinds of Zionism, saw Israel as a necessity because of that racism was, because of a deception of liberalism. The idea that the liberalism, democracy, tolerance had not helped the Jews. So they needed to find a place where, you know, in a world, let's talk about nationalism, not colonialism, where there was nationalism everywhere. The only possibility was to join them instead of to oppose the idea of nationalism, because that did not work. And I think there's a difference there.
All right.
There's a cynicism within Zionism that this is a bad world, which is not in colonialism.
All right, so here's my proposal. I'll take 6 questions, 3 on this side, 3 on this side. You try to answer the 6
It's nice
questions.
that there's so many questions.
I
though.
know, I know. You try to answer the 6
Yeah.
questions, and then we see if there is time for another round. Is that okay?
Yeah, yeah.
I'll start from
Maybe
that
it's my
side.
fault
Yes.
that I'm taking so much
No,
time.
I mean, it's, of course, they're all good questions. Sorry, do you mind if I...
I have my tea.
Yes, it's true. I'm keeping the mic.
Okay. So thank you very much for the presentation. Very interesting, and I really like your perspective with a symbol approach. But looking at the protest, the most common word you see is genocide, in my view. And then I wonder whether actually, I think what people are protesting again is basically a symbol of fight against basic human rights. You know, like not against, for basic human rights, because you know it's always killing and genocide and all these kind of things. And I want to also reflect on the role of social media, because I think that really plays a huge role in which countries come to the spotlight and which ones don't. So, for example, Sudan is having very similar issues in terms of famine, even worse. But like the intensity and the visibility of like what's happening to the people and the violation of the basic human rights is actually, I think, a big symbol of the Palestinian protests. And I want to know what you think about that.
Keep it there, because I want to take the other questions
Yeah.
before, so we manage it.
Hi, first of all, I do have, I think I might have noticed something, but can I ask you if you can go back to the symbolism of the Israelis? Yeah. Yeah, just one thing that I've noticed is one side seems to be resistance against oppression, and one side seems to be like this idealistic worldview that people want to have, and I just something that I noticed with this symbolism. But you were talking about how nationalism was everywhere, and yeah, Jews needed their own nation. But was nationalism actually everywhere, or was it just mainly in Europe, and then it was expanded from Europe to the rest of the world through projects like Zionism, or like in the with colonization mainly, like using colonization as a tool to spread nationalism? What do you think?
Right. Third question on this side. Okay. You could have said before, I was here 1 minute ago.
Excuse me. My question is related to an earlier one. So it's twofold. Would you agree what you describe as symbolism, and I think it's a nice description, would you also call that a kind of polarization, and a kind of extreme polarization? And indeed, what role do you think social media plays in that? So the discussion is not very nuanced. It's either you're with the Palestinians, decolonialism, etc., or you are on the other side, and there's no nuance, there's nothing in between. We hear it in this room today, actually. And yeah, how do you feel about that? Yeah.
Okay, maybe you better answer these 3 questions, because I see there's a lot to
Okay,
say,
yeah.
and then I'll move to the other side of the room.
Yeah. Well, there are 2 questions basically about social media. One of the things I could show to express this, which I didn't decide to do, but is that putting a Palestinian flag or an Israeli flag on social media is used as a symbol of much more than than support for Palestine or for Israel. It's used as a really as a symbol on which side you stand. And I'm absolutely convinced that social media is very responsible for creating this polarization because of the way it works, because if it shows only the extreme views, it makes you. It's designed to make you angry. So you get to see the things you don't like, and you get to see the things maybe you like very much. But if you are somewhere in between, the algorithms will not show your tweet or your post or whatever. Your question was, I think, a little bit different, but I forgot about social media. Sorry? Yeah.
Yeah, I think
You were asking, right? Sorry, I forgot.
So my question was really human rights being a big symbol for the Palestinian fight protests.
Yeah, I think it is. That Palestinians are used as a symbol for a broader struggle for human rights. Yeah. It's problematic because it makes of Palestinians something they are not. It's the struggle against human rights is not a problem, obviously. What for example, in this, what I never see is any concern about human rights violated by Hamas, by the Palestinian Authority, by Arab countries. So so that shows that it's a one-sided symbol, which doesn't mean that I'm against a fight for human rights, not at all. I'm not sure if this is the best way to fight for them. But yeah. Oh no, there was a third question, right? That was yours. It was about nationalism. Nationalism was everywhere where the Jews lived, and it killed them.
It was not in North Africa and the Middle East where Jews were usually quite respected.
That's true. They were colonized. They were in countries that were French or British or and yeah, you're completely right, because the Jews had also a complicated position in society in these colonial societies.
That was not my question.
Yeah.
My question was, like, nationalism started as an idea mostly in Europe, right? And
yeah.
You're saying that, yeah, one reason to support Israel would be for the nation state of the Jews. And like they had to have that because it was everywhere else. But that's just simply not true. And it was used as a colonial tool, as a tool to expand colonialism and expand nationalism through colonialism. Was it not?
Yeah, absolutely. You're completely right. But it was also used as a tool to discriminate against the Jews and even to exterminate the Jews. It was used as both tools.
All right, have to move on that side, and I have too many guys. No, it actually was this. You still have a question. He was first, so sorry, because I remember that from the previous round. And thanks for your patience.
Yes. Hi, I'm David. Thanks for your presentation. My question is more about freedom of speech on campus, something that you haven't had time to address, I guess. The assumption I make is that we should, as hard as it is, we should try to distinguish facts from opinions. Is it a sound assumption? As hard as it can be?
Yeah, it can
okay.
be. Yeah, well, go on.
My question is, has TU Delft the moral authority to promote facts against opinions? And if so, how? TU Delft like an institution or a third party in this kind of two-sided conflict narratives? Thanks.
I think any university should be as open to debate as possible. I don't know if that, and of course, you know, when there are certain limits. If you call for violence or if you destroy property, then I think, you know, the university can do something about it. I'm not sure the university is there to take a stand. There, maybe I disagree with some parts of the protest movement. I think the university is a place to enable debate, to where students can go to learn, but I don't see it as an institution whose primary function is to be activistic. I don't know if this is an answer to your question. Yes. Yeah, okay.
We have, okay, 1, 2, 3. No, guys, I'm sorry. Okay.
Right. Do you think on the topic of symbolism against or for the fight against colonization, do you think there's a more specific pattern in terms of fight against fight between Western and Eastern alignment? Do you notice that in terms of this conflict?
I don't know really what you mean. I don't understand the question. What do you mean by Western? And could you give some examples?
Yeah. So you also gave the example that some of the arguments being made could be made, for example, for China, for Russia, for other non-Western aligned nations, when they, for example, for the symbolism of the fight against colonization.
You mean Israel
as
is
well,
supported
right?
by the West, these other countries aren't, and that's a difference. Yeah, I understand, but don't forget, you know, the universities here, the Netherlands, they have connections with China and they have connections with Turkey, and I think it's, you can have a debate about boycott or academic boycott, but then you have to have a debate not just about Israel, but about all the international collaborations that exist.
Thanks for the presentation. So I think the central thesis of your presentation seems to be that we shouldn't make the struggle in Palestine about something greater in the world or use or put these kinds of symbols on it. But my question is then, isn't that the way empathy works? That we relate the struggle of people in a different part of the world with our own struggles, and then we find larger patterns or trends in history that probably enable those patterns? Or is it what you're saying is that there are no larger trends in history and there are no similarities between people, and that we should treat everything as separate from each other and different from each other?
No, you are right. I think this is also explains that people work like that. I also agree that people have a right to certain loyalties, that they have an attachment to certain topics and not to other topics. But I don't think it's helpful for the debate on what's going on there. Then I think you should just debate about the issues you want to debate about queer rights, about the climate. Those are the extreme, you know, examples.
Yeah, sort of similar to the question that was just asked. I was sort of wondering how you draw the line for when an issue is so far removed that it can't be brought into the conflict anymore, because I think sort of the way that we understand things in general is to fit them into history and narratives and ways of understanding the world. So I'm having a hard time sort of understanding these things that clearly are so connected to this issue for so many people. like what's then the way to frame the debates in your mind that you don't take in these broader historical, political, economic, whatever sort of things that obviously really inform how this conflict arose, where it's coming from. I'm sort of, struggling to see how it can be disentangled from these broader things when they influence it so much.
Well, I think not all of the debate is like this. So, you know, you and it's a skill, you know. I think when it's about climate change, or it's about the climate, or about queer rights, it's much further removed than when it's about colonialism. If it's about the second coming of Christ, it's also very far removed from. So in that sense, maybe it's not always easy to draw the line. But I do think there are just more than enough things going on in Israel that you can have your opinions about without having to invest them with this symbolism. I don't want to say that you're not allowed to oppose Israel because they are violating human rights. Of course you can. You can have a discussion about if genocide is going on, which is, you know, being conducted at the International Court for Criminal Justice, which is good that this is going on. So, yeah, I understand the question, but there's a. It's not always easy to find the border, but in many cases there is a border, and I think it can be found.
All right, it's 1:45. I'm afraid we have to close this part of the event. If people want to continue a conversation outside, I don't know if David is available, but certainly we can continue a conversation outside. I understand we must close.
Well, I mean, I actually don't know until what point they're going to
Shall we go until we are kicked out?
Yeah,
or
probably.
All right, then there were more questions before I go back to you.
On
There were
until
a couple of
everybody
more
has asked a
questions. I would like
question.
to give the possibility of people who haven't spoken so far. Is there anybody who hasn't asked a question yes to who wanted to? You haven't, or have you? I don't recall. Okay. Yeah.
So I just kind of wanted to reiterate the conclusion.
Maybe you can do the other way around. We just allow people to leave, those who want to leave. And maybe give an applause. Thank you. Yes. to the speaker, to the organizers, and to the audiences for the very respectful discussion so far. Okay. Let's keep it like that.
All right. So if I understand correctly, ascribing symbols and symbolic meaning to one side of the conflict enables two things. So from one, confirmation bias and blinding to any actions from the symbolic side that don't fit with the symbolic narrative. And also it enables the villainization of the other side, and thus enabling cruelty towards that side. Is that, yeah, sort of?
Yeah, that's actually quite close to what I want to say. It makes it impossible to see the complicatedness of the situation, I think, which I think is important to see. Even, no.
You said the struggle is the conflict right now is evil versus evil. Would you say that's been true for all of history in Israel-Palestine? Because Hamas, of course, is not been around forever.
Sorry, no, unfortunately not.
So my question would be, like, the other groups that have been fighting for Palestinian liberations before Hamas was around. Would you also say that then it was a struggle evil against evil? Because like there was the PLO, there was PLFP, and while they also acted, in violent manner, Would you also say like the decolonial struggles in other parts of the world, like for example in Algeria or like other places, like also violent resistance of indigenous people in America, that has been evil because they resisted? Like, would you say that that's also evil because they used violence to resist their colonizer?
Well, that really depends how it's used, and I think, but I don't think it was always evil against evil. I think there were times that there was really a possibility of both sides coming together in this conflict, with both sides trying to find a solution, and I wouldn't call that then evil against evil. I do think Hamas has an interest to continue the struggle and as long as possible, and I am afraid the Israeli government also wants to. They both have I don't see they have any interest in peace or in some kind of political resolution, except of the annihilation of the other side.
Hello. Of course, I invited you, so thank you so much for coming and for answering the questions with so much grace. I have a kind of practical question about your idea, in that, of course, there's a lot of power in symbolism, and if you are an activist or an interested party, then symbolism can be a great tool to mobilize a movement or to achieve aims. And that can be said of all sides, that, you know, like you're saying, the Christian side in the Netherlands, all sides can use it. So you could say there's a kind of interest as well in using symbolism to achieve your goals. So how do you kind of square that with your call for action? Is that just an interest that's opposed to what you're advocating for?
What are the goals you want to achieve? That's also the question here. And if you're serious about a solution there, I think this symbolism can be dangerous. I think the whole conflict is about symbolism. So the less we have of it, the better. But, you know, at the same time, people have a right to their symbolism, and I don't want to deny them that right. I don't think it's helpful.
So my question is actually related to this. You're saying that the symbolism can be dangerous and so on. But let's take, for example, the queer rights. Like Israel does a lot of queer parades, but then oppresses queer rights in Palestine. They talk about democracy, but then they deny elections in Palestine. And there are many ways. I don't know if you can go back to the Palestinian symbolism stuff, but like when it's talked about, when things like this happen, isn't symbolism actually important, perhaps even necessary, because there is a lot of hypocrisy in this subject, and that means like this is something that unites the people who relate to these other groups. For example, queers. If queers are oppressed in Palestine by Israel, isn't it important for queers in the Netherlands to fight for Palestinian rights? Because that includes queer Palestinians.
Yes, but queers are also discriminated against by Palestinians. So you could make the opposite statement, that you should support Israel.
Thank you, David. I'm going to continue on the same line of questioning about symbolism, and especially how to get beyond that, because I'm curious, to your mind, what practically does it look like in a debate or at a protest with slogans when you move beyond the symbolism? What does it look like?
much of the debates, I think, is not so symbolic or of the signs or the posters. I gave a few examples of, but if you ceasefire now, I don't think it's symbolic. It's just you want to ceasefire now. There's not so much problematic about that. Even stop genocide, I think, is not. I didn't give that as an example of the symbolism. I use it to explain why there's such a enthusiasm for conflict here, that by people that are not directly involved in this conflict, that I'm trying to understand. And I think that's the explanation for this symbolism.
Thank you for the talk. I thought about this question from the beginning, and now it came back to symbolism. And I'm afraid that we cannot do it differently. So I'm asking something which is opposite to the pragmatic side. So when you give all these examples, and for instance, that the Jews, it's a proof of the existence of God, because the promised land exists. But this promised land was written by Jews that were in Mesopotamia, and if you believe Finkelman and his archaeological findings and his study in the Old Testament, it's a myth created of a return. So if you go through this, also the democracy in America can be read as a myth. Is it really the democracy we are talking about when you talk about democracy in America? So the impression I have is that we have no other way, when you synthesize in a slogan, to make it a symbol of something that is much broader in us, that will be read by someone else that is actually describing a myth and not the facts anymore. So how does the myth defines the debate and the struggle and not the facts?
Well, of course, the myth contributes to the symbolism.
Yes, it's a source of it.
It can be a source of it. No, it doesn't have to be. Sometimes it's not a myth. And it's not about that it's a myth, but it's about, you know, that people in Holland, minorities are discriminated against. I don't think it's a myth. But for them, the way the Netherlands look at Palestine, or the Palestinians, is a symbol of how they are discriminated against. So it doesn't have to be a myth. But it is a symbol. They can be different, but they can also be the same.
Hi again. I'm afraid I'm not very satisfied with what you answered earlier. As why is it wrong to frame it in a framework of human rights? Because actually, we have instances where, of course, there are crimes from Hamas, from the PLO, that are also decried. But what we have seen and what we have seen from NGOs, from international bodies, is something more systematic. So it's hard not to see symbolism in apartheid when it has been called an apartheid state by so many NGOs, so many international human rights bodies. It's hard not to see colonialism in the settler project. So I really don't understand why framing it in a human rights perspective and a fight for human rights is so wrong. Because yeah.
I think I already tried to answer this question. I really don't want to say that Israel cannot be accused of violating human rights. I think Israel is violating human rights all the time. The question is, should Israel be the international symbol of the violation of human rights everywhere? That's problematic. Why not another country? Yeah, okay.
To decry the Sudan or whatever is happening in other parts of the world, or China, but when it comes to Israel, that's how it's different, at least for me, that our own governments, our own countries frame it differently, and that's why it needs to be framed.
No,
differently.
there you agree, but there you get into a kind of yeah, mechanism, or that both sides make, like, its response. The symbolism of the one is a response to the symbolism of the other. You know, Israel is taken as a symbolism of democracy in the world, and that's a symbol of the hypocrisy of you know, of like the only democracy in the Middle East. There is also a symbolism of Israel of being a democracy, and you rightly say there's some hypocrisy in that, but so that arouses that makes Israel symbolic for the violation of human rights at the same time. Then other people say, why Israel? Then it makes it symbolic for anti-Semitism everywhere. So it just helps, spurs on the polarization.
All right, I'll take the last question because it's 2 p.m. and I think it's time to wrap up, even though, yeah, it's a very important discussion.
Yeah, great. Thank you for staying for the longer discussion. I will answer your question, why Israel? Well, before I ask my question, so it's historical. Israel is been the one neglecting the International Court of Justice, is the one denying what the resolutions of the Security Council are being passed by. It is shredding the UN Charter in front of everyone in the UN. So the answer is historical. It's not a whim from people around the world, right? That's my answer to your question. Why Israel and not other countries, right? And it is very symbolic how Israel does this.
And
so
other countries in the Arab world, which we have all kinds
no,
of
we have
arms?
we have many. The thing is that particularly Israel behaves in such a symbolic way that becomes a symbol. So I agree with you that there are other countries, but the way Israel is doing it is extremely, let's say, symbolic as well. So the shredding of the UN Charter in front of the UN is a symbol, and that's something they choose to do. The putting.
No, in that I agree, because so
I asked my question.
The Israeli government joins in using this symbolism. Absolutely. So you know, when they put on a Star of David or in the security country, in the UN, you know, like they did after 7 October, when they say this is our Holocaust, they absolutely contribute to this, and I strongly oppose it.
Yeah. So this brings me to my question, which is the university has been confronted with actual proof of ties, of complicity with organizations that are violating human rights. The answer of the university has been very vague and symbolic. So instead of saying, yes, we're going to examine this, and in fact we are late, so we're going to take a factual approach, they are coming to this narrative of symbolism and two sides, and that people feel unsafe, and they are not responding to the actual facts in the ground, specifically in this university. So isn't it also symbolism a tool of power for oppressors as well, to neglect their own crimes as well? Isn't this the case as well?
Absolutely. It comes from both sides.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I've enjoyed the discussion so much, so please give another round of applause of David also for his patience and willingness to engage with the audience, and to you all really for the accurate, precise and very interesting questions. I hope there will be other events like that. There were also people from the Inclusion Diversity Office before. It's a pity that they left, because I also wanted to make a plea for being possible also for other events that students have tried for a long time to organize to happen. And so very happy that this has happened, and really wish for other events on other topics to be happening too. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, the Studio Generale, Marike, for organizing this.
Thank you all so very much.
Very nice discussion. Thanks.